Good evening, everyone. Welcome to Ganga Jamni's Facebook Live series. This is our season 2, Varsha Mangal. And today, on this Sunday, we have a topic called Bazaars, a walk through, and this is a virtual walk, a walk through Old Delhi's by lanes. If you ask me what is going to be the content and what are we going to do in this, I don't know because even Chandrasekhar does not know where he's going to take us. And who is Chandrasekhar? Chandrasekhar is our guest today, whose walks I have attended. And every time I go for his walk, I'm nothing but surprised because he can connect the dots from God knows where. All right. So, for those of you who want to know what we do, and all of you ask us sometime or the other who we are, what is Ganga Jamuni, I should mention that Ganga Jamuni is a cultural and educational initiative, and Ganga Jamuni started last year. And we do study tours for school children, and these are experiential study tours. In addition to this, we also do documentation and documentation of cultural aspects related to India. We started with Greater Banaras region, but now we have an entire repository of cultural traditions and festivals, artisans, craftspeople. So, and we're also looking at starting our photo archive, a citizens photo archive of the Greater Banaras region. So, if you have any ideas or any thoughts on that, please do share your feedback. But for now, we're going to be going over to Chandrasekhar, who is going to talk to us about bazaars, a walk through Chandni Chowk, Chavri Bazaar, I'm afraid. So, let me bring him on here. Hi, Chandra.
Hi, Shagufta.
How are
So, do you
you?
want me to start?
Do you want to start?
Yeah, of course. Okay, so first I'll talk about what I'm not going to talk about on this talk. Uh, about 1638 or so, Shah Jahan decided to shift his capital to Delhi from Agra for a number of reasons: overcrowding, lack of water, traffic, etc., etc. Also, because he wanted to record something for posterity, and what better than the name of a city that bears his name. So in 1639, the construction of the Red Fort, or the Lal Killa, of course, it later, I mean, it came to be known as Killa Morla. Red Fort is a much later name. The construction started and it went on till about 1648. After that, lands were parceled off, and the construction of what you call Shah Jahanabad started. Sometime in the 1650s, a wall was thrown all around. So along the river, you had Shah Jahanabad. Along the river, you had Red Fort, and then with the Red Fort on then either side, there's a wall that's thrown around the city, and that becomes Shah Jahanabad. By the 1830s, there are, conventionally speaking, about 14 gates: Kashmiri, Ajmeri, Mori, Lahori, Akbarabadi, Tohman, Kabuli, and then along the river also you've got gates: Kila Ghat, Raj Ghat, Nigambodh Ghat, Pathar Ghat, even Calcutta. So there is the fort on one side abutting the river. Joined to the fort on either side is a wall that goes all around the city, and that's how the city starts to exist. That's how the city begins. Now, when Shah Jahan built this city, there were certain pre-existing elements there already. For example, the Dargah, the grave of Turkman Bayabani, Lal Kuan, Khari Bauli, they all existed from before. So what Shah Jahanabad did was take in pre-existing elements and then build a city. And slowly people started settling down, the nobility started settling down, the traders came in, the Central Avenue, or what we now call Chandni Chowk, came into existence, so did Faiz Badar, the Jama Masjid, and all these things started coming into existence. This was in the 17th century. Somewhere in the 18th century, after the death of Aurangzeb, the Mughal Empire starts to decline. Conventionally speaking, in the 40s and the 50s, the historians see this as a decline of India per se. But then later on, when we talk about material culture, when we talk about economy, that does not seem to be the case, because with the decline of the Mughal Empire, regional powers become stronger, culture diffuses to regional power. For example, if you look at paintings, miniature move to Rajasthan, miniature moves northwards to Sikh empires, to what we call Pahadis now, Guler, Kangra. Similarly, music goes all over. Patiala, Gwalior, Lucknow. So, culture diffuses, so does the economy. And what happens? I'm sorry?
No, it decentralizes, is what I was saying.
Yes, it does. So when the central power weakens, the regional potentates become more powerful. So the first to move out of Delhi is the Nizam of Hyderabad, Chin Khalij Khan Asaf Jah Nizamul Mulk. Sadat Khan Burhanul Mulk is the Nawab of Lucknow. No, Awadh, I'm sorry, not Lucknow, because Lucknow became the capital
Yes.
much later. Similarly, the Nawab of Bengal, Ali Vardi Khan, Murshid Quli Khan, all of them slowly become independent. The Sikhs become independent. The Jats do. The Rajputs, the Marathas, and in the mix is thrown these two foreign powers somewhere in the south, the British and the French, who are trying to establish something of a monopoly over trade, and they do it by supporting local rulers against each other. So they get into battle. So that's the condition of India. Of course, the market for mercenaries is big, but also culture. There's a diffusion of culture from Delhi to all these places. So it is not the end of anything, actually. It's the beginning of regional culture, of efflorescence, of spread. So I'm not going to talk about any of these things. I'm going to
Right.
talk about the Delhi, which happened during the decline of Mughals and went on till much later. Now, Delhi in the early 18th century saw a definite decline in the central part, and the nobility became more powerful. So there was Jahadar Shah, there was Farooq Siyar, there was Muhammad Shah Rangila, invasion of Nadir Shah, and all that. So now, it is in this situation that a lot of other things are happening in Delhi. There's also inherent continuity. I mean, just because Nadir Shah attacked does not mean that the Tawaifs stopped dancing, because I mean, a lot of texts actually mention Tawaifs.
Right.
I mean, in those periods, I mean, immediately after Nadir Shah's invasion also. So it's not like, things stopped existing. The economy was going on. So, I mean, that's the whole. So my approach is more of continuity in Delhi at that point in
Right.
time. So we can start with the slideshow now, and then
No.
I'll try to explain what each of this is.
Okay. While I do this, Chandra, may I
Uh-huh.
request you to talk a little bit about the landscape? With so could you just talk about in terms of orientation, where exactly are
Okay.
we starting with Chawri Bazaar? Where exactly is this?
Okay, I'll do that. If you looked at the walled city of Delhi, if you look at the walled city of Delhi, then I mean, just don't go to this slide. If we look at the walled city of Delhi, there is the Red Fort in the front, like I said, abutting the river. In front
Right.
of the Lahori gate of the Red Fort, till Fatehpuri Masjid, is what we now call Chandni Chowk. From the Delhi
Right.
gate of the Red Fort is something called the Faiz Bazaar. Opposite that is the Jama Masjid.
Right.
Chawdi Bazaar is behind the western wall of the Jama Masjid. I think it's in one of
Okay.
the slides that you can see. If you just go down the slides, there is a slide which shows the back wall of Jama Masjid, and which shows
Right.
two business entities. I mean, two different crafts there. So that shows, gives you orientation. So we are talking about the area that is behind the western wall of Jama Masjid, and it goes
Okay.
straight down. So
All right.
Chawdi Bazaar was called Chawdi Bazaar maybe because of two reasons. There are speculations. One, it came from Chowda or wide, though the road was neither
Right.
wide nor straight. Like most of the streets in Old Delhi, this was not straight. The
Hmm.
other thing is that a lot of people say that there's an influence of the Marathas, and therefore
Hmm.
Chowda means a place where you come and congregate. So it could be that, because there
Hmm.
are areas in Delhi which have the name for the Marathi name for locality, like Wada, Jogi Wada, Mali Wada, etc. So the other
Right.
theory is that probably Chowdi Bazaar came from Chowda. The other thing,
Got
of course, it's a Chowda Bazaar. It's a Chowda Bazaar or Chowdi Sadak.
it. Abroad.
So
Yeah.
as you walk down Chowdi Bazaar, towards your left, you'll find Raghoganj. Raghoganj used to be a market for grains. Now it's a market for invitation cards. If you go straight ahead, there's Chowk Badsha Bulla, and next to it is Sham Sweets, a famous place where you can get your bedmi puri, your nalu, your matar samosa, your gobi samosa, and aloo ka samosa, and all that. And then you keep. I
Hmm.
mean, that's where Chawdi Bazaar. That's all. All of that is Chawdi Bazaar.
Hmm.
Chawdi Bazaar. Now, if you can just go to the slide, I think the
Right.
fourth or the fifth slide. I'll just run it past. Man, I'll just tell you where it is.
Okay. Can you see the slides?
Yeah, yeah. Okay, just no, not this. I think
Yeah.
there is a. I mean, Jama Masjid. I mean, you could see. No, not this. Is it? Is it that? Okay, just go up. I think it's in the beginning. This is much later.
Okay.
Yeah, that one. Sorry, the third one. I think just missed it.
Okay. There you
Yes,
go.
this is the one. So you can see in the slide at the bottom, you can see
The
the
Western
back
Road.
of the Jama Masjid, and this is
Right.
the road that comes in Chowdi Bazaar. Chowdi Bazaar is known for three things: the kaseras, the kagzis, and the kothas. So you can
Right.
see the brass vessels, that the kaseras, they were traditionally the brass workers. The kagzis,
Okay.
again, once publishing became big, they
Right.
started. I mean, it became a wholesale market for paper, and now it's probably they say the largest market for wedding invitation cards now. So
Right.
kagzis have moved from there. Dumimal and all started their business right here in this
Ah,
place as kagzis. So I
Blumenthal
mean, it's a
gallery.
yes, of course, the gallery.
Right.
So this
And
is,
you
I
said
mean,
the
these are
third one was the Kothas, Chandra.
I'm sorry. And the
The
quotas. Yes,
third.
we'll come to that. Let us first deal
Okay.
with the
So
mundane.
Kothas is what does Kotha mean?
A quota is actually a brothel or a bordello. I'll
Okay.
try to explain it when we come to the relevant slide. So no,
All
we
right.
just keep on that slide only. Let's just go.
Mhm.
So there was a study conducted sometime in the 1980s which surmised that Delhi is a city of markets, wholesale markets, for a reason. Once partition happened, Delhi became the connecting trading place for the north and the northeast for a number of commodities, whether it was brass, whether it was spices. You've got Khari Bawli for paper. You've got Chowdi Bazaar for garments. You've got Gandhinagar market. So what happened was that over a period of time, Delhi actually became a major trading point or a trading hub after partition for the north and the northwest. So
Hmm.
that's the reason why you have got so many wholesale markets in Delhi, probably greater than any other city. So now coming to what you talked about, kothas. So kothas essentially are bordellos or brothels. They're no longer there in Chavdi Bazaar. There are some architecture left over. But let me take you a little back in history. I think that's the first slide. So uh, Nach, Kotha, dance, Kathak, all of these things are often, taken together synonymously, but I have to just explain it a little bit before we move further. Uh, a system of music is inherent in the Indian tradition and history. We see sculptures depicting forms of women, men dancing. There are structures, there are poses, there's a system for it, right? So there is a system of dance. If you see both these sculptures, then, as far as literary evidence is concerned, there is a text of indeterminate age called Natya Shastra by Bharata. Bharata is supposed to be either a Muni who was asked by Brahma to compose something on dance, on music, etc., or the other interpretation. Of course, Bharata is not an entity, but actually is a portmanteau of three words: Bhava, Rasa, and Tala. So it is Bharata. So that's the other interpretation. So there is some literary evidence, and of course there is enough mythological evidence for dance, because whenever there is this sage who is heating up the heaven with his tapasya. Tapas comes from the root word tapas, or heat. So then there
Hmm.
is this Indra who sends down apsaras to please they dance, etc., and sort of try to placate the sage and break his tapasya or the tapas. So even in mythology, we have them. Apsaras actually is derived from the word apsarasa, which means the essence of water.
Ah,
They probably came out of the Amrit Manthan, and
right.
uh, and the whole logic given is that because neither the asuras nor the devas wanted to marry them, so they could be
Hmm.
enjoyed by both.
Hmm.
And later on, of course, when they become devdasis, they're called nitya sumangalis, because nitya sumangali, of course, means someone who's wedded for always, for eternity. Okay, so that's the slight background. Going further, the history of India always had these what is now quite derisively called public women, within inverted commas, but they were not. They were not a subject of derision at that point of time. They were called ganikas, they were called devdasis, they were called nartakis, kanchanis. Over a period of time, tawaifs, and the British construct of Nach,
Hmm.
essentially.
Hmm.
The Chola temple, Rajendra Chola, of course, endows temples with money for the upkeep of Devdasis. There
Right.
is Krishnadeva Rai marries a Devdasi called Chinna Devi. Rajatarangini talks about Devdasis getting married to kings. So, I mean, while it is a pretty strict order, but there are these exceptions. And then, secondly, they're not spoken with as much derision as they have over time. And we'll come to that as to why we've taken the Victorian model.
Right.
So that's how it is. So if we can go to the next page where I'll just explain what this is. So we already had a system of dance in India, a structured system of dance in India, and then with the advent of the Mughals, there are Persian elements that creep into it. So there is the Indian system of dance, and then there are Persian elements that creep into it, and it sort of gives rise to a hybrid, a fusion form, which later probably develops into Kathak. On your left is a painting from Akbarnama, a miniature from Akbarnama, which shows two women dancing. It's too small, so I don't know if you can see that, but there are these. They're wearing these two kind of things. If you can see, there are two of them dancing there, and there's Akbar sitting and enjoying. Akbar sitting and watching. Throughout history, throughout Mughal history, dancers are an important component. There are these dancers who call themselves Deradar or Derawalis, whose origin is from Mughals. Not that they descended from the Mughals, but they were a part of the Mughal retinue. Dera literally the tent. So they are the ones who are in the kothas and all that. So they are the Derawali Tawaifs. I'll tell you why the word Tawaif later on, because we've not yet reached the point where we find the first mention of the word Tawaif. So these are just dancing. These are just women who dance, or as the British say, naach. So this is what happens, and they are public women. Jahangir falls in love with Anarkali in the movie Mughal-e-Azam. That might or might not be a real story. Actually, there is a fictional account called Shehenshah in Marathi, where Aurangzeb falls in love with this lady called Hirabai, and he marries her. Dara Shikoh also. Then Jamadar Shah and Lal Kumar, Muhammad Shah Rangila and Qudsiya Begum. Of course, she's later, Udam Bhai was her name, and then she later becomes Qudsiya Begum. Then Akhtar Loni and Mubarak Begum Samru. So there is this whole, linkage where it is not that they're treated with derision. It's not that they don't have a position in the society because they own land. Veena Talwar Oldenburg talks about records from 1857 in Lucknow where they own orchards, they own land, they have massive assets, investments. So they are not poor. They're not treated with a lot of derision. They're seen as the high point of culture because, of course, one tries to make the contrast too much by saying that the normal lady of the house would be confined to the chula, the chauka, and the chadar, while these were the educated ones who were more sophisticated, who were more who knew more about the world, who knew about poetry, who could speak the language, who could converse with men, and therefore nobles send their sons there to learn etiquette and a lot of other things. So that's what it is. So this is the background of it. And Tawaif, the word actually was probably first used in a source of Murakka Dilli by Dargah Quli Khan. So if you look at most of the books that talk about the 18th and the 19th century, be it William Dalrymple's Last Mughal, all of them, when they talk about Tawaif, they go back to Dargah Quli Khan's text and his descriptions of Tawaif and the names of those Tawaifs. So all of that come from that one book by Dargah Quli Khan. The entire roster of Tawaifs that a lot of people mention in the 18th century. If you can just go to the next slide. Okay, so this is Chowdi Bazaar. Now, there are two buildings here. One is Chowdi Bazaar, the other is Anarkali Bazaar from Lahore. If you look at the yeah,
Chandra. Okay, my question is, so when you're talking about Chowdi Bazaar vis-a-vis the kothas, what is the historicity about this? Can you just take us there before we begin about the
Yeah, so that's exactly what I was coming to. It's okay, absolutely okay. So if you look at these buildings, they were called kothas, balakhana, or atariyas. All of them presuppose height. Balakhana is like an attic. A kotha is on the first floor, and so is an atariya. Right. So at the ground level, there would be a shop or where people could sit and listen to music or what, and on the top would be where would be a larger hall where the performer performs. So that is the whole thing about a kotha. It afforded privacy both for the dancer and for the person or the patron. Also, because it was a remunerative exercise for the dancer, she wouldn't be performing on the ground level because everybody could probably see it. So there is
Right.
this book on Banaras. There's a short story in Banaras called Gunda by Jaishankar Prasad. It's a
Absolutely.
very, very famous short story. It has got everything about Banaras. I mean, in that small story, it's got almost everything about Banaras, right from the tambuli to the person who's making bhang to sitting in the ghats. But there's a very interesting thing. He never the hero Nanku Singh never enters a kotha, the Gunda or the Nan. He always sits on the floor, the ground floor next to the tambuli, pays the tawaif to sing and always listens to it. But he never enters the kotha because entering the kotha means going to the first floor. While this entire establishment is considered a kotha, but where the dance or where the performance happens is the first floor. If you look at this, there are arches. I mean, I've used both. This is a photo that I received from a friend across the border. So if you look at the arches, they're both very similar. The
Right.
arches are where the tawaif would stand. So the arches would frame the tawaif like a picture, and then she
Right.
would stand, and then I mean, she would just stand there, and people would be interested, would come and watch her dance or have sex with her or whatever. So that's the whole point of this thing. So that's why there are these arches, and they're very, very similar both in. Yeah, if you look at the next photograph, I mean, this photo, of course, you can see it says Taj Company Limited, and it says something Islami. It is too small. It says
No, but this is in Lahore.
Quran. Yeah, it's Anarkali Bazaar, Lahore.
Right. And this is the counterpart Chawri Bazaar in Delhi.
This is
And
Chowdi
so,
Bazaar in Delhi. So they're
right.
very similar. They're very similar. Even the next photo, I think it's the same.
No, it's
No, okay. So I mean, this were the next photo is like. Please go to the next slide. I think
yes.
please go. Oh, so this is Lal Kunwar on one side. That is Jahadar Shah's wife. She started her career as a dancer, as a tawaif. Of course, the word came later, but as a dancer, a tawaif. Jahadar Shah fell in love with her and married her. There's a performance of her that the one in the red, the miniature painting,
Right.
is a performance by her. The one below it is Udhambai and Udhambai or Qudsiya Begum and Muhammad Shah Rangila. These
Right.
are, I mean, Muhammad Shah Rangila was one of the few one of the few Mughal rulers who has a number of miniatures in flagrant delicto, in the sense that in various acts of what is this? I can't see. Okay, it says Ganga Jamuni. Fine. So that's Muhammad Shah Rangila. Can we go to the next slide?
Yes. 1 minute. You know what?
Okay.
I am going to quickly take a short. You'll have to. I'm going to remove the banner. So I think that is distracting. And the photographs.
Uh-huh. Okay.
Now it should be
It's
better.
perfectly okay. The banner was okay. There's no problem with that.
Yeah. So sorry for that, but now you can clearly see Muhammad Shah Rangila.
Yeah, Mohammed, this is Mohammed Shah Rangila. It's like I said, it's one of the few miniatures where he's not indulging in an act of sex. So that's one of the few miniatures of Mohammed Shah Rangila. Let's go to the next page.
So I have a question before we move
Yeah.
on, Chandra.
Of course.
Now, tell me, these women, were they women exclusively in terms of classification of the women for, dancing women? Were these women exclusively dancers for the fort? Like, for instance, this person here and Lal Kumar or others, Qudsiya Begum, were they women who were exclusively dancers for the fort, or were they women outside, as in like places like Chawri Bazaar?
Okay, so there are. I mean, these were not women. There were certain women who were exclusive. They're called Dera Walis, who were exclusively tied to the Mughal court. Other than that, there were a number of free agents. So when you
Right.
look at Aine Akbari, there are multiple types of performers. They're called Kanchanis, or the gilded ones, Domnis,
Yes.
Huskinis, Hestinis, Lolinis. So there are a large number of them. It's like,
Right.
see, the problem happened sometime in the 19th century when the British could not understand this whole amorphous mass, and they decided,
Right.
let's call all of it Nach, right?
Ah.
So, and then the worst thing happens after 1857, but we'll come to that later. So, I
Right.
mean, so there are different, I mean, there are singers, there are dancers, there are prostitutes who indulge in sex, there are people who do all the three of them, there are people who do one of these, right? So
Hmm.
it's an amorphous mass that they cannot come to terms with. So, like I said, I mean, and these are not just people who serve the court; they have their establishments. Then they are also itinerant bands. Tawayef, the term comes from the word tawf in Persian, which means to move around or circumambulate, and the word is used to signify the circumambulation around Mecca. Pran Neville says that when the Tawayef moves around in a meeting, maybe that in her mehfil, maybe that is why the word tawaf comes. I mean, Tawayef was used for this because tawaf signifies movement.
I see.
Rana Safvi, on the other hand, says that again she talks about movement, but she says that they were an itinerant band of performers. So there again, movement. Dargah Kuli Khan, who uses Tawaif for the first term, talks of them as a community of singers and dancers.
Okay.
So they were not exclusively the preserve of the court. Right from the beginning of history, Ganika, right if you start with Ganikas to the other, they were not exclusively the preserve of the court. There were some Deravalis, there were some Domnis,
Right.
so a lot of these things. Interestingly, while there is no classification strictly, I came across this in Mayank Austin Sufi's book where he's speaking to R.B. Smith, and he
Hmm.
says that there are four categories of tawayefs or prostitutes, or not. I'm sorry, I won't use the word prostitute because that's absolutely wrong to describe
Right.
people. There were four kinds of performers. There were the Bedni, the Domni, the Tawayef, and the Randi. The last was the highest in the order, the most sophisticated. There is, I
Correct.
mean, and I'm sorry.
So are you sure that? Oh, I'm surprised to hear that.
Okay, so again, the term Randi was not really a term of derision in the 19th century because it was also used for the unmarried daughters of the nobility. Okay,
Wow.
yeah, and I mean, come back to 1960s, and there, I mean, 1970s. There's a Khushwant Singh book on India where he
Hmm.
says that so much is our bias against women, so much is the bias against. I mean, that unmarried women, widows, etc., are seen as people of easy virtue, and therefore the same word that is used for a prostitute, that is Randi, is used for a widow.
Hmm.
But I mean, we're talking about much earlier. So R.V. Smith said that in the 60s that it was Bedni, Domni, Tawaif, and Randi. Randi was the top. I mean, like I'm saying, right now when we talk about these, we have this bias, right?
Ah.
We when we hear a word
So that's the
like this
time
is
the moment you said that I was a little taken aback. That's the why I asked
exactly
you.
because this is the same way that people felt in the 1890s when you said a person from a respectable family wanted to learn dance or music. I mean, let's say why. I mean, and then
Hmm.
of course we go ahead and we sort of anesthetize elements of erotica. We remove we sort of how to sanitize lyrics just so
Hmm.
that the middle class and the upper classes can send their daughters and their sons to learn music. Then the
Right.
entire role of women from music is absolutely obliterated, right?
Hmm.
But all
Hmm.
that, I mean, if we can just, but that's all a part of the discussion that will happen in the next 10 minutes, I hope.
Okay.
Can we just
Let's move
move a
on.
little ahead? Okay, so this is again, like I was coming on Mughal. So this is the first pick is a Mughal paint, a later Mughal painting or a company painting of Tawayef sitting there. If you can see, there are five of them. This is Mirza Fakhru or Fatehul Mulk Bahadur. The photo is about. He was Bahadur Shah Zafar's son and heir apparent. He died before the war of 1857. So this is Salon in Mehrauli. This is most probably, because of the fireplace at the back. This is most probably Zafar Mahal on the ground, on the first floor of Zafar Mahal. You can see this fireplace on the ground floor in Zafar Mahal
Right.
because the roof is
Right.
broken. So you see three women sitting there. There is no parda. They're sitting quite openly. There are musicians or mirasis sitting in front of them and playing. So most
Right. So
probably they
this
say
is
that,
the image we're talking about. Three Mirasis sitting here, and
yeah, and
that's music.
the musicians are here and the women are sitting at the back. So they're most probably tawafs. The mirasis are the musicians. Uh,
Right.
so you can see this. So most probably because they're sitting here in full public view, there are these attendants and servants and all. They're sitting in full public view without a parda, and they are listening to music and probably they're performing. So the assumption is that these are tawaifs. So this is again one of the Mughal depiction of tawaifs. So
Wow.
next slide.
And could you talk about this one? This is very interesting, especially the
Okay. Yeah,
case study.
what they're wearing.
Yes.
So yes, so these were, I mean, these again, this painting is again from the Delhi school. These
Right.
are five tawaifs sitting, Ghulam Ahmad. These are again five tawaifs sitting and discussing. So this is a depiction of Kotha as an institution.
Right.
So this is what happens in a kotha. There are these women who sit together and talk. I mean, when they are not dancing or performing, this is probably them in the state of repose. There are theories about kotha being a totalitarian institution where you lose your identity and the institution takes you over. But on the other hand, we have, you know, if you read Umrao Jan or Amritlal Nagar's Ye Kothe Waliyan, when the narrator asks them whether they would have preferred another life, whether they would have married and settled down, they actually say no, because this does give them a sort of agency. It
Of
does
course.
give them a sort of independence. Of course, the fact that they are also slightly more they're much more educated, conventionally speaking, than the women at home. This is something that gives them a vocation, right? So, and then this is not looked at by even at this point in time. It's not looked at with derision, or I mean, it's not seen as a bad word. So that, I mean, so there is it's a respectable part of the social strata. So why would, I mean, so the whole point is that while they do belong to a kotha, they're part of it, and their independent identities are coalesced with that of the kotha. But I mean, it's a choice that they make at some point of time. Of course, I cannot make a blanket statement that no one was forced into the profession. There was no kidnapping, nothing at all. But there are Dera Walis, there are Khandani Tawaifs who are valued the most. So there are all these things. So, and like I said, that because if it's an acceptable practice in the society, then there is that much less of hesitancy. I'll give you an example. Saira Banu's mother was a person called Naseem Banu. Naseem Banu's mother was a Tawaif called Shamshad Begum. Not the Shamshad Begum. Her name was Shamshad Begum. She was very, very popular in Delhi. And Naseem Banu used to go to school in Delhi. When she was in school, she acted in a Sohrab Modi film. So, conventionally speaking, she's the daughter of a Tawaif who goes to school. But she acted in a Sohrab Modi film, and she was apparently refused admission into college because acting in film was not a respectable profession when she chose to do it. So, if you look at the contrast of that whole thing, I mean, this is how things have changed.
Right.
So, I mean, this is the institution of Kotha. A lot of people have written about the Kothas. There is Ruth Vanita writing about the Kotha. There is Veena Talwar Oldenburg writing about love, about same-sex love in the Kotha and all that. So, there is a lot of work done about Kothas, but generally not in Delhi. Lucknow, a lot of work has been done on Lucknow. A lot of work has been done on Banaras, incidentally. I mean, if forget everything, just Sabah Diwan's other song and Tawaif Nama itself is quite an in-depth details on the goings on in Banaras. In contrast, Delhi is I mean, other than Chowdi, but there is very little research that has been done on the Tawaifs of Delhi.
That's an area for you, Chandra, waiting.
Okay. So these are two, I mean, this is the evolution of Nautch, Nautch, as the Britishers call it. There are two pictures. The first is a picture from a Tawaif, from a Nautch performance at Skinner's. The picture at the bottom shows two things in which Englishmen apparently had a role to play. One, creation of concept of Nautch, and secondly, Durga Puja. So this is a Durga Puja in progress in the second photograph, and there is a Nautch performance there. So you can see the Durga Murti here towards the where the cursor is exactly. So there is a Nach going on. So it is said that when in 1757, Navakrishna Dev had asked Robert Clive to take the blessings of Durga instead of going to a church which had already been raised, and that's how this whole Durga Puja came into existence, which is not the correct interpretation. Of course, Navakrishna Rao was currying favors with Clive, and that's how he would like it to be. The second concept is Nach. Again, it's an amorphous concept that the Englishmen did not understand. So every time they saw a dance, they started calling it Nach. So here are the two British things together, Durga Puja and the Nach, and the top is the Nach happening in Skinner's place. So
now you need to
there
tell
is
us, like, in just a quick sentence, who's Skinner?
okay, sorry, I was coming to that, but I'll tell anyway. So Colonel James Skinner is a half Rajput, half Scottish soldier. He was not taken into the regular army because he was not an Englishman. So he formed what is called the irregular, and he formed what is called the Skinner's Horse, which is still in the Indian Army. He was not exactly a white Mughal because he was not white. But he fought for the British in a number of wars. He started off with the Marathas, but later on he joined the British and he set up the irregular horse, the first horse and the third horse, which are still a part of the Indian Army. Of course, Indian Army, other than the President's Bodyguard and the 61st Cavalry, does not have any mounted regiments. They are all armored regiments now. So Skinner's Horse still continues. I think outside the President's Bodyguard, it is probably the oldest in the Indian Army. The President's Bodyguard was set up sometime in 1772 or 1776, and the Governor General's Bodyguard. There's a Banaras connection there also. Chait Singh had supplied the initial 50 soldiers that formed the corpus of the President's Bodyguard.
Right.
So,
making me nostalgic by mentioning Banaras every now and then, but we'll move on. So
okay.
the church, don't forget to mention the church.
Sorry?
The church in Kashmiri Gate.
Yeah, I will come to that on a later slide because it's there in this presentation. So the reason why I showed you this was because when the Britishers were settling down in India, when after the Battle of Buxar and the Battle of Plassey, they became richer, and then they defeated Tipu Sultan and their wealth just kept mounting, they started copying the lives of the Indian princes and the Umras. And therefore, they developed a liking for this whole dance performance and tawaifs. And the sex ratio in Calcutta in the 1790s was extremely adverse. It was 4,000 Englishmen, 250 English women, because the hardship of traveling all the way from England all across the Cape of Good Hope and coming to India. So therefore they took on a number of these BBs, as they called them, and they took on a lot of the BBs. I mean, and then they had, they would pay them, they would live with them, they would cohabit, and then when one officer left, they would pass the person on to the other officer. Interestingly, a lot of quotas, a lot of establishments came up near cantonments. And there is actually this Persian novel. Of course, you can't find copies of the novel anymore, but there is this Persian novel called Fasana-e-Rangeen, written by this person called Hasan Shah. It was translated to Urdu as Nashtar. So we have a copy of the Nashtar, which Kuratullah and Haider translated to the Nach Girl. So the story is this, that there is this English officer called Ming, and it's autobiographical. So Ming has this Gumashta called, an officer called Hasan Shah, and then a traveling party of Tawaifs come there. So the thing is that Ming falls for this lady called this girl called Khanam Jan, and she refuses his advances, and she's a very popular courtesan, and she refuses advances, and Ming is okay with that, and he sort of takes on a different BB, and then promises to maintain the entire troop. And they settled down in where Ming is in Kanpur. And then Hasan Shah, the author, falls in love with Khanam Jan. And she also falls in love with him. And they both secretly get married. And then they plan to, and then the Tawaifs are moving away, and she's about to catch a boat when Hasan Shah, of course, they arrange that They will go by boat first, and Hasan Shah will finish his work and then meet them later on in a faster boat. Right. So, but that does not happen because Hasan Shah is delayed excessively, and then the boat, and she crosses the river, and then she falls ill because of the disappointment and the tragedy, and then she calls for Hasan Shah's grandfather, who was a Hakim, who had treated her earlier, but again Hasan Shah does not reach in time, and she dies, and then the whole concept of Darya, because that the river that cannot be crossed, it could be a metaphor here for the distance, for the impossibility of the relationship. But I mean that I mean, towards the end, the protagonist becomes the Darya, or the impossibility, rather than either of these people. But the point is that the point that we draw from is that Ming is a white Mughal. He knows Farsi. He likes his Nach. And he is okay with a Tawaif refusing him, because the Tawaif, of course, had agency, a lot of freedom, is what I'm trying to say. Of course, when the novel, I mean, the novel was written much later, and Khanam Jan is shown as 13 years old and Hasan Shah is shown as 15, which could not be the case. But I mean, of course, the poetry is very, very mature. But what comes out of this work is that, I mean, the white Mughals, of course, and the freedom that a Tawaif had at that point in time, something that we also see to a certain extent Umrao Jan, which was written about more than 100 years after. Umrao Jan is written between 1901 and 1905, though it pertains to the revolt of the period before the revolt of 1857. So, I mean, there is, of course, Umrao Jan again. She's a Tawaif, and there's a lot of respectability attached. And then when Ruswa asks her whether she would have chosen a different profession, or whether she would have fallen in love with the man, so she said that no, because her blandishments are a part of the performance, because that's where she earns money from. And even after 1857, when everything is almost destroyed, there is hope towards the end that she comes back and gets into the profession. So, I mean, there is some sort of independence, there is some sort of culture here, there's agency, there's remuneration. So all of this make this a profession that is not really looked down upon. It's only since the utilitarians start coming in, and when there is a whole the whole concept of the Oriental culture being the Western culture being much better than the Oriental culture, and every element of Oriental culture subject to derision, that even Nach is looked down upon. But interestingly, when we talk about Nach, there are, I mean, even when English women come and watch Nach, some of them, of course, find it very, very good. They find the music good. They say that even though we can't understand the language, the expressions and the actions and the bhava and the abhinaya make us understand it. But one of my favorite raconteurs of colonial India, Fanny Parks, has a problem with that. She did not understand. She finds it extremely boring. So, okay, so this is not a social commentary. She just doesn't like the quality of Nach. So there are two interpretations to it. One, she must not have had the best of performers. The second is a slightly more mischievous interpretation. There are instances where Mandi, where a lot of authors record that the Englishmen, the Sahibs, say that the Nach that is performed in front of us would not be performed in front of the Memsahibs. Right. So there are these two interpretations to those. I mean, to that.
So she got the sanitization.
She might have.
Okay. Nevertheless, she makes an appearance in Mirror of Beauty as well. And,
she ends up talking to Wazir Khanum, and she's very, very sympathetic, and that's also the feeling that you get. She's very observant, and she talks a lot. In Mirror of Beauty, Wazir Khanum observes that she's talking a lot to everybody, so which is sort of
right. So next slide.
Okay, so now this could be the Khazanchi ki Haveli. These are all Nach performances. So this could be the Khazanchi ki Haveli. So if you can look at that, it's a typical Haveli. This is probably the Dalan or the Dardalan on which the performance is happening. You can see the first floor, the mezzanine floor, which is called the Duchhatti or the Duhashmi. You can see that there are women observing from there. Behind that, there will also be screens. So this, and you can see the performance is watched. The The audience is exclusively male. If you can see that,
Right.
the audience exclusively in the
Then,
first
I
picture
have
and
a
second.
question.
Yeah, of
You
course.
mentioned Khajanchi Ki Haveli. I'm aware of this. Could you just sort of tell us what the location and things?
Okay, so Khazanchi ki Haveli is in Gali Khazanchi. So if you enter Dariba Kalan,
Hmm.
and if you enter Dariba Kalan and walk straight in towards, I mean, before you turn towards Noghara, Khazanchi ki Haveli would be towards your left. So it's called
Hmm.
Gali Khazanchi. It's a very narrow lane. I mean, you will
Right.
have to look for where it is. So it's now a dilapidated Haveli over a period of time. It used to be the house of the treasurer of probably the Mughal emperors. It's totally dilapidated. Also, it has fallen to disrepair because the number of claimants. Because
Hmm.
even if like say, one person had about 7 children, then
Hmm.
200 years ago that multiplies into a lot of claimants in the present day.
Right.
So
Right.
that's the reason. So the elements of architecture are all here. You've got the Shahjahani mihrab or the Datedar mihrab, cast
Got
arches. You've got the
right.
fluted pillars, the rounded fluted pillars here, the thick ones. The ladies are watching from the mezzanine floor. Behind that, there'll be jalis called Jafris from where they're again watched because if there is no light inside and there's light outside, there's privacy. You can't see from outside, but people inside can see outside. So we'll also discuss the Haveli when we go to the, I mean, when we go to the walk proper, when we're going to, when we visit the Havelis of Begum, Zinat Mahal and Ahsanullah Khan. So I will talk about this. These are again photographs of dance. If you go to the next page again,
Right.
next
Before that,
slide.
I just want to
Yeah.
mention that Meru Jafar from Lucknow says one English woman actually translated the songs of the Nautch girls into English and played and
Yes.
sang them in
Yes.
Lucknow.
That's yeah. Yeah. That's true.
All right. So we have another lady here. Um,
Yes, that's
uh,
again. This is again a notch performance in progress. There are two Mirasis or musicians sitting here, sitting in the front, and there are these notch. I mean, of course, there's a notch performance going on. Notch. It's a notch. It's she's a tawaif or a domni or bedni. So it's just a performance happening. The public
So
performance,
it
the
must be
audience is
their
almost exclusively.
clothing actually tells you that there's a different provenance here, right? The first one is wearing a heavy duty farshi, and
Absolutely.
and the second one is more kind of Rajasthani.
Yes.
I don't know if I'm correct there, but it looks very different in terms of their style, clothing and things. All right, so we moved on to the next slide.
Ah, okay. So you see a lot of photographs happening. This lady is called Chabuk Sawar. She was again if you look at what she's wearing, the one lady is sitting. These are all photographs of notches being taken. There are two. Once the camera came, once photography became popular, the British obsession with the recording everyday life moved from
Hmm.
company paintings to photographs, and that's how
Hmm.
we have photographs of notch girls all over the place. More importantly, these were also circulated, and these were also like an advertisement for the notch girls themselves. So they would actually sit for these photographs and they would perform for these photographs. So once the miniature paintings were replaced by photographs, this is what happened. So you
Hmm.
find more photo. You'll actually find descriptions also. I think there is one, the latest slide where I've given a description along with the.
Okay. Shall I move forward?
Yeah, yeah, of course. Please move forward. There's nothing that I have to say on this.
Wow.
Yeah. So this is Waziran Bazar woman. It says. So this is again the recording of everyday life India for the British public. So there is a whole description of what this is. So this is, and she's obviously sat for the photograph. And because of this photograph, people in England and in other parts of India or Delhi would know who Waziran was. So it worked
Wow.
both ways. For the Britishers, it was the photo. It was a record of the everyday life. For the Indian, for the Tawai, for the Baiji, it was a sort of an advertisement. So it made them popular.
What a look at that, the look in her eyes. Fierce. Okay.
And there's another thing. Again,
Hmm.
I mean, there's just another thing. If you look at all these photographs, I forgot. I had asked a friend of mine as to why Indians are much darker in these photographs than they actually would be
Right.
in real life.
Hmm.
So
Oil.
I mean, I'm just trying to remember what he said, but he's there. I mean, there is of course a racial angle to the exposure also, in the sense that they were supposed to be. I mean, they were made to look way darker than they were. But I'm just trying to remember the technical
I
term.
also
Maybe it'll
feel
come
like
to
they
me.
oil themselves and their hair far more when they're doing photographs because oiling was sort of the norm at that time. It was sort of a part of the shringar. I feel they oil themselves. If you see a lot of images, they're oiled, fully oiled on their faces. That makes them look darker. That's what I think.
The next again, I mean, I'm just again. They're all sitting for photograph. This from Lucknow, from Calcutta, from Sindh. The lady in the middle is from Sindh. There's a
Ah,
slight difference in what the Lucknowi lady is wearing, the Kashmiri lady is wearing, the Sindhi lady is wearing. So
so this is a Kashmiri
no, that's
courtesan.
Lucknowi,
This is Lucknowi. This is Kashmiri.
and that's the middle. The one in the middle is from Sindh.
Okay. Wow. So you can look at the filigreed sort of jewelry that she's wearing. Okay.
Okay, so okay, now we saw Chavdi Bazaar at the beginning, the grilled up. I mean the kothas. Bang in the middle of Chavdi Bazaar is this mosque called Ruknuddaulah ki Masjid.
Sadly.
Ruknuddaulah was a prime minister of Akbar II. Very
Hmm.
little is known about him other than that he's from a family in the Deccan, and that he built the mosque. We built the mosque sometime in 1806 during the reign of. Uh, just give me a moment. I'm sorry, I just missed my flow chart. Yeah.
Okay, hold
So
on.
it was.
So Abhijit Mukul Kishore says that the film was standardized for rendering white skin accurately.
Yeah. Oh, okay. Yeah, Mukul is the one who. I mean, exactly. So Mukul is the one who explained this to me. I had called Mukul up like I think about 3 or 4 months ago when I was going through photographs of Bombay Plague, and I wondered
Hmm.
why we. I mean, we all were so dark. We all were much darker than we were supposed to be. So yeah, Mukul
Correct.
is okay. So Mukul is watching this. Fine.
Thank
So
you.
this. Thank Mukul.
So
Uh,
Dollar.
So this is this is the Masjid Ruknuddaulah. It's on the first floor of a building, which by this time has become a standard because probably the revenues came from the shops below it or the rental of the shops below it. So this is Ruknuddaulah. It's if you we don't have close-ups, but it's extremely well carved. It's almost filigree like it's made in sandstone. Right now it's under the charge of a Kashmiri Rafugar.
Hmm.
He is the person who looks after it. This was built in 1806 by 1807 by Ruknuddaulah, who was the prime minister of Akbar II. Then, in a response to an article by Rana Safvi, of course,
Hmm.
there was a response to it which said that Ruknuddaulah's grandsons were killed in the revolt of 1857, and he and his son were both prime ministers of or the wazirs of the Mughal emperor.
Hmm.
This was repaired in 1913 by the Nawab of Mamdod. Mamdod is in Punjab.
Hmm.
That's about what we know from the various marble slabs there. So when and Ruknuddaulah was from Deccan, from Hyderabad probably. So and therefore, discussion of Hyderabad and Tawaif would not be complete without a reference to this lady called Ma Laka Bibi.
Hmm.
Ma means moon, Laka means like, Bibi, Begum or Bibi means Bai.
Hmm.
Sorry, Bai, of course, means madam. So she was one of the earliest women whose divan was published. She was a Tawaif. She was a companion to two Nizams of Hyderabad, to a couple of their prime ministers. But in addition to that, she was actually honored by a khillat. She was given soldiers. Here she is sitting with a Maratha general of the Nizam of Hyderabad, and she's performing. She would go on hunts. She's even gone on campaigns. Now,
Hmm.
let me not confuse you. She may have fought, she may not have fought, but if you watch a number of these movies, including the movie Panipat, when the
Hmm.
Maratha or the Mughal camp moves, they have tawaifs, they have barbers, they have markets within the camp itself. So
Hmm.
so she could have been a part of the camp. She could have fought, but she was extremely active, and she was the first. I mean, that's the first page of her divan. She was the first to. She was the first lady probably to have her divan published. So, I mean,
Lovely.
the only reason why I put her here is because there's a talk on Tawaifs, and then Ruknuddaulah goes back to the Deccan. And just near the Ruknuddaulah Mosque is where you get those, I mean, the Kulle chart, Hira Lal
Hmm.
and Sultan, both where, they carve out and take the pulp out of fruits and then replace it with with chana and aloo and chaat masala. So that's just
Nice.
below this mosque.
Yeah, you should try
Uh,
this in mosque. Also, I should add that Vidya Shah has actually done a beautiful rendition of her poetry, and
uh-huh.
this is her series on White Mughals along with William Dalrymple. Now, what is this inscription all about here?
Oh, that's just a cover page of a divan.
Okay,
I
all
can't
right.
read it from here, of course,
No,
because I
no,
mean,
no, I get it. Right. Okay. Okay, we're moving on. We have
Okay.
a
So now let's stop right here for a bit background. So we were talking about Chavdi Bazaar. So Chavdi Bazaar was, of course, people now. I don't know how far back this term goes, but it's referred to as the Bazaar e Husn, or the market of beauty. But I don't know. I have not read. I've not read I mean, I've read current texts which say that. I've not read any 18th or 19th century text which calls Chavdi Bazaar that. So what happened was that, okay, this is all of this is one. I mean, this is Gohar Jan. The two of them are solo Gohar Jans, and one is Gohar Jan with her mother Malika Jan. The one where both of them look like
Malika
sisters
Jan.
because
This
yeah,
one is Malika Jahan.
and the other one is Gohar Jan. Yeah, one on the
Right.
left is Malika, and yeah.
Now, what
So
is this
that's
thing
that.
with unibrow? Do you think it was treated or did she have a unibrow?
Uh, I I don't know because she does seem to have a unibrow in all three. The one with her mum is where she has. I mean, just the beginnings of a unibrow.
Hmm.
So I'm not really the expert in
No,
unibrows.
because every time I look at her images,
Yeah,
uh,
you're right. You're right. That's one distinct thing that pops out of a photograph. But
right, interesting.
so the reason, can you just show me the next slide?
Sure.
Probably.
We move
Okay,
to
so
Begum.
then just go back to Goharja.
Hmm.
Let's go back to Gajan. So what happened in 1857 was that the revolt of 1857 happened, and a number of courtesans apparently were said to be in league with the mutineers or the revolutionaries, as they can call them.
Hmm.
So a lot of their property was confiscated. Secondly, a lot of them were forced to serve the Britishers later on.
Hmm.
Then the whole Victorian moral, I mean, because the Crown Act came into existence, the Victorian morals were imposed where a woman was synonymous with domesticity. And these were public women, these were women who were not at home. So there was a
Hmm.
bias created against them. You already had the utilitarians baying for their blood, saying that this is a culture that is essentially tribal, where there is a lot of emphasis on body, etc., etc., a lot of physical relationship, which is not good. You had
Hmm.
mercenaries breathing down our throats, saying that this practice is immoral. Of course, mercenaries were one of the first to accept the fact that of all the women that they met in India, the wives come across as a class apart and as more intelligent and educated than any. But I mean that's
Mercenaries or missionaries?
yeah, missionaries, Christian missionaries, absolutely.
Okay, all right.
Yeah. So there was a lot of missionary. I mean, there was a lot of missionary activity against them. Then the contagious, actually, the Crown Act. The Crown Act combined all these performances together. So there was a prostitute who probably would sell her body. There was this dancer. There was a singer. There were performers. All of them were grouped into one community, and then there was stigma attached to it because they said that because the British interpreted in such a way that their main business was prostitution and that singing and dancing was incidental to it, which is absolutely not the case, and it's a failure of on their part to understand the Indian ethos. But anyway, so that also dealt a death blow because our initial freedom, the initial Indians who got Western education, they were first social reformers before they became freedom fighters, and they again took on. I mean, they also took on these biases, right? So when the Britishers started talking about, when the Englishmen started talking about the Tawaiffs or the Nautch girls in such fashion, it was immediately picked up by the Indians, and they also sought to sort of try and do away with do away with this profession. So there are these purity societies starting from Punjab right down to Tamil Nadu, which sort of try to end this practice. There is a very interesting example that I want to give. Sometime in the 1750s, there was this dancer, performer, Sanskrit, Telugu, Tamil scholar called Muddapalani. Muddapalani was a courtesan in the court of Pratap Singh, who was a Maratha ruler of Tanjavur. She wrote a
Okay.
book called Radhika Santwanamu, or how to manao Radhika. Sorry, how to please Radhika, placate Radhika, who is angry. So because Krishna is getting married to Ila, and Radha is getting her ready for Krishna. So there is, I mean, there is a lot of expression of sexuality, female viraha, anger, etc. And there's very little male gaze there. But there are a lot of verses that could be categorized as erotic. So in 1850s and 1860s, when the next edition comes, all those verses are removed. In the 1900s, there is this lady called Bangalore Nagaratnamma who decides to include those verses in the present edition, and she wants to bring out an edition. And she is opposed by one of the leading reformers of Andhra called Veerasatingam Pantalu, and he succeeds in banning that book in 1910. I was talking about sanitizing, so that, and he managed to ban that book in 1910. And of course, that's also when the Devdasi Act is passed, and when temple dances are also banned. And within 20 years, the
Wow.
dances, the erotic or the lasya elements are removed out of Bharatnatyam and then anesthetized so that women from middle and upper classes can learn that at home. So
Hmm.
when the tawaifs are slowly, being obliterated, some of
Hmm.
them take to prostitution. And then
Hmm.
Chowdi Bazaar is cleared by the British, and these women are sent to this place called Kart Bazaar near Lahori Gate. And
Right.
in 1957, from there they were moved on to the first floors of what is now called Swami Shraddhan Mag. It was then called Garten Bastion or GB Road.
GB
So
Road.
there, I mean, what I want to clarify is that, I mean, what I've been trying to say is that while the Tawaifs were not prostitutes, but yes, with time, I mean, some of them were forced to take up this profession because all alternate avenues of employment were shut down for them.
Right.
And prostitutes were tawaifs were trained in dance and song. So the other thing that they did was public performances. So Gohar Jan was one of the earliest, but not the earliest to give. There are about 300 gramophone records of hers, is what they say. You can something in
Hmm.
his book, and she starts by saying, "I'm Gohar Jan," and that becomes
Hmm.
a brand. She's extremely rich, and she gets about 300 rupees for a song, which is a 3-minute song in that time in the 1900s. And she had a buggy of her own, and she rides around Calcutta in a buggy. And actually, the governor of Bengal sees her riding in a buggy and thinks she's a princess, and later realizes that she's a tawaif, or she's a public performer, and he fines her. And
Hmm.
but then she doesn't want to give up riding the buggy, so she keeps paying a fine in advance so she can ride the buggy. So that's the kind of money that she was earning at that point of time, and she's popular. She's Malika Jan's daughter. Malika Jan was an Armenian tawaif, Armenian singer performer who breaks away from her husband and starts performing. At the age of 12, her daughter Gohar Jan gives her first performance at the court of the Maharaja of Darbhanga
Hmm.
at the age of 12, and then she gets popularity, and then the gramophone records happen, and then she later returned to Darbhanga and later to the courts of Mysore. So some the wives do make a transition to this. The next step, of course, is cinema. Just go to the next page. I'm sorry, just the next slide. This
Mhm.
is Begum Akhtar and Jaddan Bai.
Hmm.
Begum Akhtar or Akhtari Bai Faizabadi was also from a Tawaya family. Um, she was a Tawayaf to, I mean, she was a performer or a Tawayaf to start off with initially, but she did for a brief interregnum give up music, and then she marries a solicitor and a lawyer, and then she starts again. Uh, uh, so there are so people detect a sort of a, not an ambivalence, a sort of a duality in her performance. On one side, she's sort of sanitized herself and she's moved to respectability. On the other hand, the connect that she has with the audience is a
Hmm.
connect from the days of her quota, where she establishes almost a personal link with personal rapport with each of them. There is this recording that you must see on YouTube, and it's very sweet. There's Kafi Azmi
Ah.
sitting on a AR performance, Begum Akhtar, and you can actually see that he's smitten every time she opens her mouth to sing. I mean, it's quite a sweet thing, but that's so. I mean, there are a lot of writers who talk about this duality in Begum Akhtar's performance. The next is Jaddan Bai, again again a performer, again a Tawaif a singer, but she later became, she later joined the film industry. She also became a producer. She is Nargis's mother. There is a reason why I put both these photographs here together, the same duality. So she teaches Nargis everything other than music and dance. So the two things, or music rather, because the two things that tied Nargis to her Kotha heritage is sanitized or is left back, and you've got Nargis the actress. So Jadan Bhai, Nargis started acting as a child star. She was called Baby Rani. So the three child stars who become famous are Baby Rani or Nargis, Mehjabeen Ali Bakhsh or Meena Kumari, and Mumtaz Jahan Begum or Madhubala. So these are three child stars who later become famous. So Jadan Bhai again moved over to cinema, and for them it was, of course, because of the fact that they were already performers. This was probably a logical step, given that their avenues were restricted. The next slide is okay. So this is Nimmi and Naseem Bano. Nimmi was Nawab Begum, again from Delhi. Naseem Bano was Shamshad Begum's daughter. They both entered the film industry. Again, they both from Tawaif families. Nimmi was a Tawaif before she entered. So they again, it was a natural progression for them to move over to the film industry. Now, a couple of things here. While they were accepted in films, they were also the first performers on All India Radio. But there is a catch there that they were not seen as respectable as time passed. They were asked to change their Bai or whatever names to Begum or Devis, or get married, or both, unless they wanted to enter from the rear of the studio. The only way they could enter from the front of the studio was if they did these things. Rasulan Bai got married. Begum Akhtar was already married. So this sort of AIR created a sort of bias. And then when we talk about Paluskar and Bhatkande and organization of Khayal into Gharanas, we don't see any of these, we don't see any lady performers in this, considering that whether it was Khayal, whether it was Thumri, whether it was Dadra, Chaith, they're all, a lot of this has happened. Maybe they're not progenitors, but a lot of this had happened over time in Kothas, right? And all of a sudden, mysteriously, when we talk about the Gharana, there's absolutely no woman there. So what has happened to the narrative? So that's an interesting thing. Like someone had once told me about Anjani Bai Malpekar. Actually, my wife Deepa had told me about Anjani Bai Malpekar. She said that there is a story that was told to her by her guru about Anjani Bai Malpekar is again a Kalavantin. It's like different states had their own names for these performers. I'm just using Tawaif as a generic. Kalavantin in Goa, in Maharashtra, they were called Naikas. They were called Maharis in Odisha. I remember reading as a kid the death of the last Mahari or the last Devdasi in the temple of Jagannath Puri. Maybe not as a kid, maybe as a young person, so not really that far back. So where was I? Okay, yeah. So there's the whole narrative of wiping out the women performers from the Gharanas, of course, because it had to be respectable for the masses to send their children to learn music. What kind of a parent would you be? Apparently, if you are taking up an art that otherwise was taken up by a public woman. Of course, right. People like Shanti Hiranand and all have become disciples of Begum Akhtar, but that is much later, right? That is after Begum Akhtar becomes a Thumri singer and becomes a famous classical singer, not before that. So, this is the natural progression. Can we move to the next page? Okay, so now from movies, from Tawaifs moving into movies being made about Tawaifs. The two movies that two movies that have shown a stylized representation of Tawaifs, Umrao Jan and Pakiza. The reason why this is here is only because of stereotyping. Because I wanted to show that, this is the way of, I wanted to show that these are the two movies where Tawaif made, but these are stereotypical movies. The only thing that you can make out from the movie is the inevitability of the women being confined to the Kothas for life. Whether it's Umrao Jan or whether it's Pakiza, there is in the beginning a lot of defeatist attitude. They will not move out of the Kotha, and it's their life. So initially, when I was talking about Kotha totalitarian institution. They talk about that. But other than this, I'm really not interested in talking about either of these movies. The only reason why I wanted to show as a contrast to the next movies that are going to come, the next slides.
Okay.
Okay, this is Pyasa. By the time of Pyasa, uh, by the time of Pyasa, Tawaifs were no longer seen as just performers, but they were people who lived in brothels, and there was sex involved there. One of the songs is actually a variation of Sahir Ludhianvi's Chakle, which essentially means brothel. So here they're also seen as sex workers. So by the time Pyasa is made, they're also seen as sex workers. By the way, if you want to see a decent mujra in a Hindi movie, a decent, when I say decent, a mujra that is closest in approximation to how it was described in the later medieval texts, it is this mujra from this movie called Mahal. ये रात फिर ना आएगी, Zohrabai Ambalewali and Rajkumari. And when I started, I said that when there were these British men who said that even if we did not understand the language, just by the movement of hands and bhava and abhinaya, they made you feel. I mean, they made you understand what's happening. So if you listen to that here, I mean, if you see it on YouTube, Raat Fir Na Aayegi, there is not a lot of dance, not a lot of flair, and they're not running all around and turning in hoops. She's just trying to explain the hand and the face and a little bit of movement as to what it is, because when the performance started, the song was the soul and the dance was the body. So you are using the body to interpret the song. But of course, then later on in the Hindi movies, of course, because in screen you don't want someone to sit on a muda and start singing for a long time, they had to bring in action. Well, I just digressed, but then this is what it is. So this was Pyasa, which already shows the woman as a sex worker. Of course, she's got a heart of gold, and then there is a relationship with the poet, which is again a very, very traditional thing. Ghalib's relation, Ruswa's relationship with prostitutes. So I mean, with Tawaifs. So this is just a natural progression. The next slide is. Again, these are three movies: Mandi, Dastak, and Tisri Kasam. Again, they deal with Tawaifs. Tisri Kasam is a very, very. I mean, it's Mare Gaye Gulfam, Fanishwarnath Renus. This bankrupted the amazing lyricist Shailendra. But this was a very, very sensitive portrayal of the relationship between the Kochwan and the Tawaif. Of course, here again there is this. There's the element of. Of the performer being also the performer also indulging in sex with people. So I mean, it's the whole point is that by this time, not in Tisri Kasam interestingly, but by this time in popular media, they had already taken a negative tone. Dastak again reinforces that. Dastak is it's about this couple moving into a house which was earlier inhabited by a Tawaif, and the Dastak is a constant knocking on doors. Mandi is based on Ghulam Abbas's Anandi. That's an Urdu text, Urdu novel, and Mandi again. These are they are prostitutes. They are Tawaifs, and again this demonstrates a duplicity of the society, because while each and every member of the committee that wants to throw them out of the city center visits them in privacy, visits them in private, in public they literally throw them out, and then of course they try to establish themselves in a different place which is uninhabited, and then they all go their separate ways. So all these, I mean, these three movies and Pyasa, they sort of are a commentary, unlike Pakiza and Umrao Jan, which stick to the formula, as does Tawaif, as does Salma, as does any other Muslim social. These 3-4 movies of Tawaifs, they sort of show the duplicity of the society, where the face of the society in front and that at the back, society's Janus face, to be very frank. So that's what is shown in these 3 or 4 movies. So that's the reason why I brought these, because that's the argument that I am trying to push, and not the argument that either Pakiza or Umrao Jan is trying to.
All right.
So this is okay. So that's the end of the Tawaif parts. We are out of Chawdi Bazaar, and into what is called Chowk Hauz Qazi. Hauz Qazi Chowk is it used to be, there used to be a house or a tank built by a Qazi, and there used to be stream running to it, and the stream dried up, and the house and the chalk was no longer chalk. I mean, sorry, the house was no longer operational; it was covered. So, from the Hauz Qazi Chowk, if you turn towards Khari Bauli, the first thing that you see on your right is Masjid Mubarak Begum.
Right.
It is Masjid Mubarak. Mubarak Begum was a Brahmin girl from Pune who was converted to Islam. She was one of the 13 BBs of, and the most favorite BB of David Ochterlony was a Major General. He was a Bostonian. He was born in Boston, and then he bought a commission to the Indian Army. Boston when it was under the English, not Boston when it was under the Americans. So he bought, and he was born in 1959. So when he met Mubarak Begum, he was quite old. He fell in love with her, of course, and then they sort of married, and they had two kids. They had two children. So Ochterlony built. If you just go to the next slide, this slide after that. I'm sorry.
That's
so that's David Ochterlony. David Ochterlony is enjoying a notch performance here. Below that is below that are the jade seals of David Ochterlony. This is Nasirud-Dowla. That's his Mughal name. So he was a white Mughal in the sense that he could speak Persian. He was slightly more sympathetic to the Indian cause. He had these BBs who were Indians. You can see him wearing a pagadi, smoking a hookah. So that's essentially what he did. And next to that is Mubarak Bagh. That's the sort of tomb that he built for himself and his wife, Mubarak Begum. The dome of this was probably an inspiration to the St. James Church. The St. James Church was what James Skinner built in Kashmiri Gate after because of a vow that he took at the Battle of Uniara, where he said that if he survived the battle, he would build a church. So that's how St. James Church in Kashmiri Gate was built. And this dome was probably an inspiration for that. So this is David Ochterlony and watching a notch with the seal. Now let's go back to the first one. So David Ochterlony was both the resident of Delhi. He was also an active army man. He served during the Delhi campaign, the Gorkha Wars, even the Pindari Wars. But he was forced. I mean, there was what is called the Bharatpur succession, because of which he was forced out, and he took it to heart, and he died in Meerut. So he could never be buried in Mubarak Bagh. His wife was Mubarak Begum, or Maharatan Mubarakunnisa Begum. So she styled herself Lady Ochterlony, to the chagrin of the British, because they could not tolerate a Desi calling herself lady. She styled herself Qudsiya Begum, which again insulted the Mughals, because Qudsiya Begum was Muhammad Shah Rangila's wife and Ahmed Shah's mother, and she was, of course, she was Udambai the Tawaif also. And then she also was referred to as Jarnali Begum, and she received the nazars from people. She had a lot of influence on this person, so the people of Delhi also hated. So she built this out of her inheritance, and when she died, of course, Delhi did what they did. They started calling the masjid Randi Ki Masjid, because there was no other way that they could get back at her. So so that's what they did. So when confronted with a powerful woman, that's what they do generally. So they started calling this Randi Ki Masjid. It did not in any way bring down the number of people who came here to pray. Of course, the dome has now collapsed in the rains a couple of weeks ago. These are all photos from before. It's a very small mosque. Again, it's on the first floor of the market. Again, the assumption is that the shops in the ground floor would be given on rent to fund the operations and the expenses of the masjid. The next slide is the interior of the masjid. So Maharatan Mubarakunnisa Begum, after Ochterlony's death, married this general called Inayat Khan, who fought the British in 1857. Of course, all the property was confiscated. The Mubarak Bagh was absolutely destroyed. There's nothing left of the Mubarak Bagh. Anyway, this is the interior of the masjid. As you can see, even if you look at the person if you look at the person down below, the masjid is not. If you look at that for a scale, the masjid is not really very big. It's a decently sized masjid. What is significant is that there's one of the many edifices. It's one of the many edifices that was commissioned by women in Delhi. Not, I mean, in Shah Jahanabad, of course, we had Baga Begum or Haji Begum building Humayun's tomb. That's a debate. Then you've got Mehmanaga building Khairul Manazil, and then you've got Jahanara and the whole Chandni Chowk, whether it's the Hammam, whether it is Sarai, whether it's a pool. Then you've got Roshnara building Roshnara Bagh, Zinatul Nisa building Zinatul Masajid or Ghata Masjid, Sunahri Masjid, Fakhrul Masajid. So I mean, there are a lot of these monuments. Akbarabadi Begum building the Akbarabadi Masjid, Fatehpuri Masjid built by Fatehpuri Begum. So I mean, this is just a continuation of the trend. The next, okay. So opposite this is the lady you see here, of course, is Mumtaz Jahan Begum or Madhubala, one of the 3 child stars who became superstars later on. The other 2, of course, Baby Rani Nargis and Mehjabeen Ali Baksh or Meena Kumari. The old kheer shop is in a building that apparently was once where Madhubala used to stay. But this Bade Mian ke kheer shop, Bade Mian started off supplying buffalo from Meerut, buffalo milk to the people of the Sheher or Chandni Chowk. And then later on, he decided to set up a kheer shop. That's in the ground floor. The building that, of course, the building where Madhubala stayed must have been demolished, and this was built in its place. But this is almost opposite, or the other side of the road to the Mubarak Begum of the Randi Ki Masjid.
Right.
Can we go? Yeah, the next is... Okay, so I start... Yeah, this is Khazanchi. The reason why I've got this here is because... let's go to the next slide first. Let me just take a look at the next slide. Okay, so let's go back to the first slide. I'm going to ignore this one. Let's go back to the slide before this. Okay, so Khazanchi ki Haveli, no, the one after this, the one where this Khazanchi ki Haveli is. Okay, so mansions or Havelis, the largest Haveli in Shah Jahanabad was, of course, the Red Fort. And that became the model for every big Haveli of every noble in Delhi. And they tried to emulate that. So the structure would be that there'd be an arched doorway. So this is Bhavani Shankar or Namak Haram ki Haveli, where you see the arched doorway to the right. You know, and there'd be a chatta, like in Chatta Chowk. So there is a vestibule. Then there is the otla outside where you sit. And then when you come in, there is this open courtyard of the Sehan. Then there is a Dalan, there is a Dar Dalan. Then you see those 2 stories, the mezzanine floor. This was probably where the dance happened. If you remember, there was a black and white photo of a dance happening. So this was probably where the dance happened. Bless you. So this is how a Haveli would look like. So as you enter, I mean, there'd be this arched doorway. As you enter, there'd probably be a vestibule or a chatta. Then there'd be an open area. So there are the Haveli, if you want to divide it into 2, it will be called a Diwan Khana, where the public had access to. Public means a select few. And then the Mahal Sara or the Zanana, where you did not have access to. To understand the architecture of a Haveli, we must first forget what we already know. Like we are used to seeing bungalows in Delhi where the garden is outside. In a Haveli is called an introverted garden where everything is inside the walls of the Haveli. These are called Nashemans. These Havelis of nobility were called Nashemans in the Waqiat Darul Hukumat Delhi. They are called where the walls are high, the building starts, and then the garden happens. So there is a chance that you have a open courtyard, then a dalan, then a daldalan, then a pillared colonnade, then some construction, some rooms, and then the zanana. So I mean, depending on how big your Haveli is. And when I'm talking about Havelis, I wish that there was a walk, because from Ajmeri Gate down to Mubarakul Nisa Begum used to be one Haveli, Kamaruddin Khan's Haveli, then which broke into different parts. So there is this Gali Shatara, there is this Rajun Nisa. So there, so I'm sorry. So that, that Haveli broke into parts. So Havelis were huge establishments. You know, everything was inside them. So it was not the Bagicha was outside. So this is how, sorry. So this is how a Haveli would look like. Can we move to the next picture? The next slide. The slide after this. Okay. Oh no, the slide before, the slide after this. Okay. So we are now at Ahsanullah Khan's Haveli. Ahsanullah Khan, Hakim Ahsanullah Khan was the Hakim of Bahadur Shah Zafar. But it says Cinema Excelsior here, which is what it is, which is what it is today. This is how it looks like from outside. Cinema Excelsior was what was the Mardana, or what was the part of the Mardana, or the Diwan Khana. Excelsior was Excelsior started sometime in 1930, and it showed all kinds of movies, but mostly, if you look at it, it's a Mere Mehboob. That is the it showed a lot of what we call, for lack of a better name, of a convenience, Muslim socials. Mere Mehboob, Bahu Begum, Mehboob Ki Mehendi, Nikah, Deedar Yaar, Mirza Ghalib. So all these movies would first be shown in Jagat. Lala Jagat Narayan, one of the larger film hall owners. He owned, I think, he owned Ritz. He owned about 6 odd halls there. But then the USP of Excelsior, that they would have repeat shows. If you look at this, it says grand revival of Mere Mehboob. Which means that while movies were shown for a couple of shows on taken off, Excelsior would have 3 to 4 shows. Then these movies would come back again and again, and that would bring back the audience. So that was Excelsior's USP. So between 1930 and 1980, it did very well. Of course, the gentry moved out of these areas and it fell. And I think till about 2012, it was doing some business of sorts. So that's the front of Excelsior, and that's the side of Excelsior. So you can see an arch. So that again is the arch to the Haveli of Ahsanullah Khan. So now we can move to the next page.
Okay,
this is bizarre. But anyway, this is the best that we can get. So this is Ahsanullah Khan's Haveli. This is, you can see the arch, you can see this tall building. So this is further inside, and as you go in, there is like a guest house of sorts that has been broken down. Further in is a hammam. So, I mean, it was built over more than, just the built area was more than 2,000 yards is what it was built over, not square yards, 2,000 yards. So that's the length. So that's how it was. Ahsanullah Khan was the Hakim of Bahadur Shah Zafar. He was also very, very well versed in poetry, in Persian, in astronomy, in medicine, of course. And he used to run a free clinic in Chitli Kabar. And he used to live here. I mean, he was very, very prosperous. He used to live here. In 1857, he was seen as... Sorry.
Which area is this exactly?
Oh, we are still... I'm sorry. I'm really sorry. So this is after, on the same road, we are progressing. This is after Mubarak Begum's mosque. We are on what is called the Lal Kuan road that goes straight up to Khari Bauli. So just to confuse you a little more, from Hauskaz village to from Haus Qazi, as we move towards Khari Bauli, this would be on your left hand side. We then go to Lal Kuan. It's all a straight road that goes till Khari Bauli. So we are still on the same road. So this is on your left hand side. You'll see the arch. You go in and you see these buildings. In 1857, he was seen as a collaborator.
Right?
I'm sorry?
2,000 yards built.
Yeah, 2,000 yards built. That's so it's in 3 stages. So I mean, you have the Diwan Khana, then you've got the guest house, then you've got the Zanana. You can even go to the next page. You can see how tall it was. So in 18, so this is this is all in really bad shape. You've got pull carts here. This is the entry to the hammam. There's no hammam anymore. It's probably buried under the rubble. You've got the fluted pillars and you've got plasterwork. They say that the roof of the Haveli was painted by the same person who was maintaining the roofs of the Lal Killa. In 1857, he was seen as a collaborator. He was called, I read somewhere that he was called Gangaram Yahudi. Gangaram was a parrot, and a parrot squawks a lot, and Yahudi because, of course, we are systemically and casually racist. So that's the sort of thing that was said about the Jewish people at that point of time. They were untrustworthy, so he was called Gangaram Yahudi, because apparently on the 7th of August there was a blast in a Sepoy magazine, or the Mughal magazine, where the arms and ammunition was destroyed, and he was blamed for that, and his house was looted. And later on, when Bahadur Shah Zafar wanted to join Bakht Khan to go to Bareilly, and later on from there to Rampur, and from there to Mecca, he had dissuaded him and said, "Go to Humayun's tomb instead," and the rest is history. So, and Ehsanullah Khan's Haveli was also confiscated, but later returned to him. Then it was bought by this person called Dipti Ikramullah. It was called the Ikramullah Street, and then it passed on till it became evacuee property. Now there is a
Right.
school running out of it. There is this factory. There is welding going on. So now it's in pretty bad shape.
Yeah. Right.
Yeah.
Back to that.
Moving further. Okay, just okay. So now I've drawn an arrow. Again, it's not visible here. I don't know why this photo. I forgot to remove this photo. There are two kinds of bricks: the Lakori brick and the normal Indian brick. It shows which part of it was original and which part of it was from the. I mean, which part of it is modernized. This is again an arch from there. Just I think you can remove. I mean, change the slide.
Okay.
As you go down the road again from, can change the slide.
Further down.
Yeah. So as you go further down on the same road, we are on the Lal Kuan roads. No, not further. Sorry, I didn't mean further down. I just meant this. Yeah. So you see something called Mohalla Rodgara. Rodgara essentially means the people who the gut workers, animal gut. It used for bowstrings, etc. So now, of course, there are no gut workers. You go in and you'll find large dags of biryani being cooked all over the place. Go further down and there is an interesting building. I don't know what it is called, but I liked it because it had these, a sandstone filigree kind of work there. Next to that is a board which says this used to be Lal Kuan, now it is shut. So that is, now you've entered Lal Kuan. It is the same road from Lal. I'm sorry, hello.
The well is now covered with a tin shed.
Yeah, it says that on the board. So, so you've got a tin shed covering the well, and then you've got a tin board announcing that. So this is, I mean, we are on the same road. The only reason why I don't know how to work a map on PowerPoint, so I thought that these are things that people would see on their left hand side or the right hand side and understand that we are on the same road. Going further, yeah. So there are two things here. There is, as you go further in Lal Kuan, there is the old Hamdard Dawakhana. Hamdard Dawakhana was set up in 1906 by Hakim Abdul Majid. Hakim Abdul Majid was trained under the Sharif Khanis and the Hindustani Dawakhana, and he set up his own Dawakhana. In 1807, he invented or developed what is called Ruh Afza. Technically, there's nothing new. There was always rose syrup, and there was always rose syrup, and there was always syrup, and there was always sugar. But he used 33 ingredients apparently, and he developed this thing, and it was prescribed for everything from dehydration to diarrhea. They were sold in old wine and beer bottles essentially. He died in 1922, and the business was taken over by his son Abdul Hamid and his widowed wife. In 1947, when partition happened, one part of the family decided to go to Pakistan, Hakim Mohammed. And then they started making the same medicines, the same Ruh Afza, using the same formulation, and there's not been any controversy between the families as far as this is concerned. So Sualin, Joshanda, Sinkara, Hajmola, they're all made on either side. In 1971, when again Pakistan, East and West Pakistan, the partition, and it became Bangladesh, the Hamdard establishment there was left to the Bangladesh people, and now there are 3 countries producing the same medicines under the same brand name and the same formulation. So, that's how it is. So Hamdard, of course, the larger office now is in Asif Ali Road. You can see that, but this was where they had originally started. Next to it, of course, is it's called Ghanta Ghar Habshi Halwa. This is when you come to Hamdard Dawakhana, then there is a turn to your right which goes into Balli Mara. Balli Mara is where the Nawab Gali Qasim Jan Balli Mara, where the Nawab of Loharo and his family had an establishment, and Mirza Asadullah Khan Ghalib lived there. But I'm not going into that. Just that I forgot to tell you that when we talk about Mubarak Begum, she was also a patron of arts, and whether it was Asadullah Mirza Ghalib or whether it was Zauq, she was they were patronized by her. Interestingly, Mirza Ghalib's nephew or his wife's cousin was married to the adopted daughter of Mubarak Begum. and then he died. And then when he died, there's an elegy of sorts that he writes where he says, "Lazim tha ki dekho mera rasta koi din aur, tanha gaye ho ab raho tanha koi din aur, जाते हुए कहते हो कयामत को मिलेंगे, क्या खूब कयामत का है गोया कोई दिन और." देन तुम माह शबे चाह दहूं थे मेरे घर के, तुम माह शबे चाह दहूं थे मेरे घर के, रहता यही नक्शा मेरे दिन घर का कोई दिन और, तुम कौन से थे ऐसे खरे दाद और शिदत के, करता मलकुल मौत तकाजा कोई दिन और. Which means that, you know, you never paid off your credits on time. तुम कौन से थे ऐसे खरे दाद और शिदत के, करता मलकुल मौत, मतलब the king of death would have waited for you more. So that's what he'd written about. That's what he'd written about his nephew Arif. I mean, of course, we are not going to Balli Maran this time. We're just stopping at this Ghanta Ghar wala Habshi Halwa. This is Habshi Halwa. It's again, like I said, that systemic racism, casual sexism. I had taken a person here, and we had this sort of, not an argument, we had this sort of debate as to why it's called Habshi Halwa. So I had, like an idiot, assumed that it's because it came from Al-Habsh or Abyssinia, that it's Habshi Halwa, but he kept saying no, it's because it's black. And then he said that, you know, you should know. I mean, he said that you don't have to be smart, because we are like this and this is black, so that's why we called it Habshi Halwa. Then I asked the store owner, so he said it's because of the color that we call it Habshi Halwa. So like I said, that casual sexism, systemic racism, we've done it all.
Right.
So again, we are not going towards Balli Maran. We are again walking straight down that road, and we come to this. We come to the Haveli of Zeenat Mahal. Zeenat Mahal was Bahadur Shah Zafar's wife. Bahadur Shah ascended throne in 1837 at the age of 67. He probably married her about 3 or 4 years later. She was 19 and he was about 71 or something. So she built this Haveli. Again, I don't know if I can say that there's an accurate portrait of hers, because they were all in their pardas. So this is probably an idealized picture, and this might, because I mean, if you look at the portraits of Mughal queens, they all have this sort of similarity. But there are, I mean, so then this is what this is the Haveli that she built. Before I tell you why this was built, we just have to go back a little. So when she got married, she had a son called Jawan Bakht. So you must understand that Bahadur Shah Zafar, among his wife and his concubines and others, had about 54. She had sired about 54 children, 22 men and 32 women. So when Jawan Bakht was born, I think he was 17th or 18th in the line of succession. So she did not think that was possible for him to succeed to the throne, and therefore she did two things. Of course, that if she's thrown out of the palace, then she has a refuge here. That's why the Haveli was built. And according to people, she had also devised a method of eliminating one person after the other. So while Jawan Bakht was growing up, the heir apparent was a person called Mirza Fateh ul Mulk Bahadur. So Fateh ul Mulk Bahadur, and then there was the British agent was a person called Elliot, the governor of the Northwest province, of which Delhi and Duke were the part of, was a person called Thomason, after whom the Roorkee Engineering College was named. And there was Metcalfe. So all of these three die in quick succession of an unknown ailment. So Thomason, Elliot, and Metcalfe die. Mirza Fakhru dies in 1856. So it's suspected that, you know, she, in league with Ahsanullah Khan, who is an Oriental Hakim, of course, and like Britishers say that he could make a poison from a vegetable that could not be detected. And therefore, of course, they all succumbed to that, is this whole theory. And then she tried to, you know, I mean, but still, her son was, like I said, 17th in the line to the throne. So, I mean, 17th in the line of direct descendants. So he was a long way off, but he was the preferred successor to Bahadur Shah Zafar. Bahadur Shah Zafar preferred him over anybody else, which is a repetition of history, because Bahadur Shah Zafar's father, Akbar too, did not prefer him, who was the eldest child, but rather preferred Mirza Jahangir. And the British absolutely refused to accept that, and they insisted that Bahadur Shah Zafar succeed. Bahadur Shah Zafar tried everything to get Jawan Bakht to become his successor, but there was nothing doing. And in the meantime, Mirza Fakhru or Fatehul Mulk Bahadur had already signed an agreement with the British, much to the chagrin and disappointment of Bahadur Shah, which said that after Bahadur Shah Zafar's reign, they will move out of the Red Fort and go to Mehrauli. So that was already done. But anyway, so that's also the reason why they also impute motive to her collaborating with the British during 1857 so that her son could become a successor. But nothing of that sort would happen. And she and Bahadur Shah would be transported to Rangoon, where she'd eventually die in 1886. This building, after that, of course, this building was confiscated to British, and this became the first Patiala house, in the sense that this was owned by, this became the property of the Maharaja of Patiala, and this was where this was where a Tawaif used to stay, the one that he had relations with, till the 1880s or so, and then then it was turned over to the British. They made it into a sort of a ration office in the 60s. A large part of it was demolished, and there's a school now. So this is on the main road, again the same road that goes to Khari Bauli. A little ahead, there is a turn to the left, which takes you to Gali Faraj Khan. If you go in, you will find the southern gate also. So this is like, oh, this is how she looked towards the end of her time, and this is what it looks like from the road. There are these two jharokas, and there is this gate. Now she was called Danka Begum because. Just give me a moment, please.
Right.
Hello. Namaskar. Hello.
I think you need to get the floor.
Oh, that's okay. Sorry. So, so this is how it looks like. There are these two jharokas on top. She was called Danka Begum because her announcement would be, her arrival would be announced by way of dankas. There is an elephant. I mean, this gate would allow an elephant to enter with a howdah on top. Of course, you can't. I mean, it's not that high because the road has risen. This was also where a tram track was laid right in front of this. So there is no howdah. I mean, no elephant or no howdah can go. I unfortunately do not have a picture of that, but the dome inside this, the dome on the chatta is a prime example of how to construct a dome. The Lakori bricks are so intricately arranged. I mean, it would seem as if you take one brick out and the entire thing will fall. It's precariously balanced, but it's so beautiful. I mean, it's just as if it's a spider web. Unfortunately, I don't have a photograph. I might have taken one. I couldn't upload it. So this is This is Zeenat Mahal's house or palace. Of course, there is nothing left of it. Now, if we keep going straight, then at some point of time, do you think that is there a photo after this?
Yeah.
Yeah. So before Khari Bauli, we take a right turn, and we enter what is called the Fatehpuri Masjid. Fatehpuri Masjid was built by Fatehpuri Mahal or Fatehpuri Begum, one of Shah Jahan's many wives. This was built in 1650. This predates the Jama Masjid, and this was a congregational mosque probably till this was probably the congregational mosque till Shah Jahan built the Jama Masjid. Now it's interesting because this is probably one of the only congregational mosques that has a single dome. Can you go to the next picture? I don't know if I can show that. Oh no, not. I mean the picture before. Sorry, the slide before this. Okay, you can't see it. It's a congregational mosque with a single dome. You can see the Sehan or the courtyard in front. You can see the wazoo tank. There is a small.
Here.
I'm sorry. Yeah.
The dome.
And slightly, if you bring the cursor straight down from the dome, there is a sort of platform that is called the Dikka. That not there. Yeah, slightly to your left. Try to the left. Go up slightly, and it's like a platform. That's where the muezzin, all the actions of muezzin are repeated on the Dikka, so that people in the entire courtyard can see what's happening. So it's one of the quietest places in Chandni Chowk. Once you enter this mosque, you can hardly hear the hustle bustle all around.
Right.
So this is what it is. So there's a courtyard. Then of course Shah Jahani mihrabs. Again, the arches are, if you can see the arches on top, they're the cusped arches. This is again a Shah Jahani innovation. Yes, all of that is cusp. Then around this is a madrasa. All around this are shops, and they were supposed to fund the running of this mosque.
Right.
This mosque, interestingly, after 1857, except for the platform and the mosque, was sold to Lala Chunnamal for 40,000 rupees. And later under Lytton was brought back for 1,16,000 in 1877.
Hmm.
But this was not the only mosque in Delhi to suffer indignity. The English by notification were allowed to walk into Jama Masjid with their shoes on. Zinatul Masajid or Ghata Masjid was first turned to a bakery and then into a stable. Akbarabadi Mosque was destroyed. So that's what happened. But then this was given back to the Muslims, and it became it became a regular mosque for prayers, etc. That is this. You can, of course, now you can see that Dikka just below the arch, the main arch of the mosque. There is this platform of sorts. So this is towards here. Yep, that's where it was. Yes, that's exactly right. That's a platform from where the action the muezzin stands inside on a pulpit or a mimbar. It's actually 3 steps. It's next to the mihrab, so he stands on that and then he prays, and the people outside look at this person who's standing on the dikka. There are 2 of these in Jama Masjid because Jama Masjid is much larger. And then of course we end our the next stop and the last is Khari Bauli. Khari Bauli is the largest spice market in Asia. The building that we are looking at is called Garodia Building. Garodia Building was built sometime in the 1920s by Seth Lakshmi Narayan Garodia. And I think it says Garodia Market here in the
Right here.
in wrought iron. So this
Yes.
is the largest spice market in Asia, probably. This is a view from the rooftop of Garodia Market. So this is Khari Bauli. Khari Bauli as a locality again pre-existed the founding of Shah Jahanabad. It was a Bauli during Sher Shah's time, apparently. there was a brackish water Bauli, and it was covered up. It's no longer extant, but the like Dhola Kua, it's still, I mean, a water body has given its name to a place where the water body no longer exists. So that brings us to the end of a rather long walk. It was an hour and 48 minutes.
Well, your favorite Takia Kalam.
हमेशा देर कर देता हूँ मैं.
Right. So,
any queries, any questions that anybody has?
Well, people have added some. Monica Which says so much knowledge. She's seconding my thoughts. So always a pleasure. And I forgot to mention this at that time. Shri Ashok Mathur, who's also a resource person, says Bhendi Bazar Gharana.
Yes, Bhendi Bazar Gharana is Anjani Bai Malpekar, is the Gharana of Anjani Bai Malpekar. Actually, if I'm not wrong, Amir Khan Saab's father is also from Bhendi Bazar Gharana. Though Amir Khan Saab takes pride in the fact that he's more of a self-taught singer. Anjani Bai Malpekar was one of the. Did I complete the story? I don't know. Anjani Bai Malpekar, one of the.
Yes, we can complete it now.
Anjani Bai Malpekar was one of the leading lights. So I heard the story about both Amir Khan Saab and Bade Ghulam Ali Khan Saab sitting on her feet and listening to what she had to sing. This was much after she retired. She left music at about 40 or so after her guru died. So Bhendi Bazar, and then Begum Akhtar is again a disciple of Anjani Bai Malpekar.
In fact,
Bhendi Bazar actually is in Bombay. It takes the name from behind the bazaar. It has nothing to do with Bhendi. It is behind the bazaar. So that's why it's called Bhendi Bazar over time.
So if you want to know more about Anjali Bai, and you can actually look at Chandra's post, and we can actually forward it on Ganga Jamni's wall as well. So Charita Sanya, who is one of our big supporters, is thoroughly enjoying. Thank you so much. Okay, so always enjoyable. All right. Any things that you feel, because we have time, we have all the time. So if you feel there's anything that you may have missed on, Chandra.
Okay, so when so Jawan Bakht is actually pushed to become the successor. So in 1750 or 51, when he's getting married, there is this. Of course, the court poet is Zok, but his Sehra is asked to Ghalib is asked to compose his Sehra. So Ghalib does that arrogant thing and he says that हम सुखन फहम है गालिब के तरफदार नहीं देखे कह के कोई सहरे से बेहतर सहरा. So Bahadur Shah Zafar, of course, irked that it's a direct challenge to his guru. I mean his ustad and the court poet. So then he asks Zok to write a Sehra, and then Zok ends his Sehra by saying that जिनको दावा हो सुखन का ये सुना दो इनको देख इस तरह कहते हैं सुखनवर सहरा. Of course, then Ghalib writes this whole long Qata Masrat, that is the his his petition for forgiveness, where he says that सौ पुष्ट से है पेशा आबा सिपाहीगिरी कोई शायरी जरिया इज्जत नहीं मुझे. I mean, it's a sort of a backhanded slap, and then of course he says that आजादा रूह हूँ मेरा मसलक है सुल्लिकुल हरगिज कभी किसी से अदावत नहीं मुझे. So on one hand he says that unlike Zok, for whom शायरी जरिया इज्जत है, सौ पुष्ट से है पेशा आबा सिपाहीगिरी शायरी जरिया इज्जत नहीं. Then he says of course that आजादा रूह हूँ मेरा मसलक है सुल्लिकुल हरगिज कभी किसी से अदावत नहीं मुझे. Then of course then he takes on the emperor or the Mughal king and says that माना क्या ये कम शरफ है कि जफर का गुलाम हूँ माना कि जाहो सरबत मनसब नहीं मुझे. Is it not enough that I am a gulam of Zafar, though I don't have anything to show for it? So in typical Ghalib fashion, Ghalib takes on both the Mughal. Of course, both of them understand, and then discretion being the better part of valor, this does not happen after. There's nothing that happens after that. So that's the Ghalib connection to Jawan Bakht.
All right, so wonderful. Always a pleasure. I second everybody who has complimented you here. So, Chandrasekhar, I just want to ask you one last question. I think it would be very helpful if our viewers can get a list of books. I know you mentioned Sabha Diwan Tawayef Nama. You mentioned
Okay.
Hina Olden. So could you just
yeah, but that's Lucknow. I just mentioned for Tawayefs. There is Shahjahanabad by Shama Mitra Chinoy. There is, of course, there's Swapna Little Chandni Chowk. There is Dargah Kuli Khan's translation of Dargah Kuli Khan's book, again by Shama Mitra Chinoy. There is Notch Girls of the Raj by Pran Neville. There is a chapter in Devashish Das's Lal Kila of the Red Fort. There is the last Mughal. There is Shamsur Rahman Farooqi's Kai Chand Hai Sare Asman. There is of course the resource that I mean, my first port of call is always the page maintained by Dr. Francis Pritchett in Columbia, the Columbia.edu. So that is a good resource. What else is there? Then of course Mayank Austin Sufi's book. Mayank Austin, Nobody Can Love You More. Nobody Can Love You More, 2 pages, page 57 and page 75. So they're the 2 pages that are relevant for our discussion right now. So that's, I don't know, that's about it. And a lot of articles on the internet, I'm sure.
Also, some of the primary sources that you mentioned, some of the primary sources. Could you just tell us again?
Waqiyat Darul Hukumat Delhi, then Dargah Kuli Khan's Murakka Delhi.
Or how do you get it? Is this published in Hindi, or is
it's there on Rekh. Okay, you there is a translation of Dargah Kuli Khan's that is available on probably academia.edu. It is by Shama Mitra Chinoy. I have got my copy from the IIC and I photocopied it. So that is this, but the book is available. I mean, but you have to look for it. English translation. Waqiyat Darul Hukumat Delhi, again available in Rekhta, but I don't think it's been translated to English. Then Ain Akbari, of course, Ain has been translated. There is the Murthy library. Akbarnama is a decent version. I mean, you get a decent version of the Akbarnama there. What else was my primary source? Okay, then of course, Geet Govind, the Natya Shastra, all that is just. I mean, I mentioned all of them in the passing. So
Right.
that's.
So, great. And uh, you also mentioned Umrao Jan, and you
Umrao
mentioned
Jan Ada by Ruswa. Actually, I'm forgetting the name. Umrao Jan, very interestingly, Umrao Jan Ada is the first book by Haji Ruswa, and there is a second book. Actually, it's Umrao Jan Ada was a character in an unfinished book by Ruswa. Then
Hmm.
he's written a book after that in which Umrao Jan accuses Ruswa of telling people about their private conversation, about their intimate discussions and all that, and she castigates him for publicizing it. I'm forgetting the name. It's called The Pain of Loneliness or something of that sort. There's an English version that just came out. I read here it is. Malika Jankar. Yeah. It's called Junoon Intezar.
Okay.
Like if you look at Iqbal's Shikwa and Jawab Shikwa, this is actually the Shikwa after Umrao Jan. So this is like a revenge where she literally takes him on and says that we're all. I mean, this is not how it is done, and you should not have publicized this. And then she publicizes his obsession with this Christian lady called Sophia, and the nazm that he's written his her memory and all that. So
All right.
it's
Like
just been translated in English.
Oriente. Um, all right. So wonderful to have this bibliography and wonderful virtual walking experience that we had with you.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. And 2 hours don't pretty much, remember those walks that we do with you. By the way, Chandrasekhar Tampi also does heritage walks for INTAC and
Back.
Delhi chapter, and he also does walks for Walking Fast. So for those of you who look up Chandrasekhar, he is on Instagram as DELHIBERATE, and he's on Facebook, very active Facebook page. So please sign up for some of the walks once everything gets better. And until then, we hope that you're safe and everyone at home is happy. Now, next weekend we will be our Ganga Jamni presentations would be around uh, Muharram. So we have some of, you know, I can't reveal this to you, but watch out for our posters by Wednesday, and it's going to be an interesting lineup. Thank you all so much for being with us today, and thank you for your continued support. Have a great Sunday evening. Bye bye.